the way the Green Party itself has moved in the last few years, it's moved quite radically towards the left, and it's bringing in a lot of supporters who would have traditionally voted Jeremy Corbyn or the left of Labour. If we can't be mature enough to sit down and talk to people with differences of opinion to us, I think that's hugely problematic, especially for leading figures, especially for politicians. And I was taking pictures of the people who were out campaigning, and someone who was a little bit racist came out of his house shouting abuse at me and accused me of doing reconnaissance. My dad actually went from his, he was part of the Steelworkers Union. We've got some power stations that are still blast furnaces that are still working on coal and stuff like that. While we're greening those up, we can create new opportunities at the same time. People aren't voting reform because they love reform. People are voting reform because they're fed up with the two-party system. They're fed up of the Conservatives and then Labour pretending to be left and then switching right when they're in government.
Well, Mothin, thank you very much for talking to Middle East Eye. It's a real privilege to talk to you. And first of all, actually, could you tell us, you've sort of popped up on the scene, a bit about yourself. What's your background?
First of all, Peter, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for giving me the time. I really appreciate talking to you. So I was a Labour activist for a very long time. So I joined the Labour Party when I was 18, and I really got political during the Iraq war time. I remember going down to London for my first ever demo, and it was the 2 million person demo, that big one. And that really opened my eyes to how powerful political action is. And it really sort of energized me and got me involved in the movement. So I wanted to be part of making a change for our communities, up and down the country. And a few years ago, I was really inspired when Jeremy Corbyn got in. And I thought, yes, finally we're on the cusp of something, a really compassionate type of politics. And sadly, it wasn't to be. And shortly after Keir Starmer got in, there was one incident that really got to me, and I saw him slowly moving towards the right. And it was one incident in particular that just said, that's enough. I can't stay in the Labour Party anymore.
What was that incident?
So it was during Ramadan, actually. So during Ramadan, everyone's fasting. And there was one incident where Keir Starmer was invited to attend a Ramadan event. And I think it's been the tradition amongst Labour leaders to always attend this event. And Keir Starmer refused on the grounds of a Palestine-supporting organisation being represented there. And with Ramadan and with Iftar is that kind of meal where, regardless of your politics, it's a time to sit down, time to contemplate everything and, really take blessings. And I just found that someone who could turn down that because someone who disagrees with you is at the same table, I just found that a little bit too much. And
I could see this. It's if you go to church, or for instance, you may be sitting next to a Tory and you're Labour. That isn't the end of the world, or even some. And if you go to a mosque, it's the same thing. Yeah, mm-hmm. And it reminds me a little bit, because we're talking against the weight of the Gaza tragedy, of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Do you remember with the pastor in Bethlehem, very distinguished, Mothin Ali, who's spoken so powerfully about Gaza and about Palestine? And he came to Britain, and the Archbishop wouldn't sit next to him because he'd attended an event with Jeremy Corbyn. And what was the Anglican Archbishop of our country doing, making that sort of decision?
See, when it comes to those kind of things, it's like when you won't even talk to someone, I think that's where our problems start. If we can't be mature enough to sit down and talk to people with differences of opinion to us, I think that's hugely problematic, especially for leading figures, especially for politicians, people who want to be leaders. You have to be able to communicate with people despite your differences, because that's the only way we're going to really find solution.
And more than that, there is nothing dishonourable about supporting the Palestinian cause.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a sort of, even if you disagree with it, it's still an honourable position to hold. I didn't know that. I think it's a very striking story about Keir Starmer, who, remember, before, when he was trying to become the local MP, was attending Free Palestine events, I think, of some kind or another. You know, there's interesting photographs of him at radical occasions. I mean, what are seen as radical occasions. Anyway, that up to that moment, you'd spent, what, 15 years as a Labour supporter, a Labour activist?
Something like that, yeah. I joined the Green Party in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So around springtime of 2020 is when I joined the Green Party.
Let me. Did you vote for Starmer, by the way, as leader?
No, I voted for Rebecca Long Bailey.
Yeah.
So Becky Long Bailey was my pick.
Yeah.
And Richard Bergen for deputy.
Yeah. Now, Richard Bergen, I think, is he your local MP?
He's not my MP, but he's the MP in the ward that I represent.
Mm-hmm.
I've known Richard for a number of years. I get on well with him. I used to campaign for him. He's a really nice guy. I'll tell you an interesting story. Once I was out campaigning with Richard, and I was leafleting for him, and I was taking pictures of the people who were out campaigning, and someone who was a little bit racist came out of his house shouting abuse at me and accused me of doing reconnaissance. And Richard just, he stood up, spoke out, and he said, "Look, this is not acceptable," and defended me. And the way he defended me was really strong. And I thought, this is a really principled man.
Yeah, I wonder if you may find in due course some Labour MPs, and we're already seeing it with councillors, I take it, going to the Green Party, just finding it too much to stomach to accept the policies of this Labour government.
I mean, especially around Gaza and especially around what's happening with the genocide, I'm surprised that more Labour MPs haven't left. This is one thing that's disappointed me about a lot of the Labour MPs who are on the left, who would have always spoken out for Palestine beforehand, who have been silenced in large ways. People who would have really opposed the disability cuts that the Starmer government is trying to put through now. I'm really surprised that they're still in the Labour Party. I with open arms, I'd say, look, where the Greens are now the representative party of the left, it's time to join forces and let's make this a real powerful movement.
Indeed, and we read reports that there's going to be a breakaway Labour Party, as it were, sort of with Jeremy Corbyn and that maybe the four independents as well. How would your relationship be in that case with that movement?
I mean, like I said, that first demonstration that I went to in London, I saw Jeremy Corbyn speak, Michael Foot speak, Tony Benn speak, and I have a lot of respect for Jeremy Corbyn, and I would like them. I'd really like them to join the Greens and work as a united force together. Why? Because we've already got the party set up. To set up a political party is not easy. To get candidates, to vet candidates, to find a good way of campaigning is not easy. We've done a lot of that hard work, and the way the Green Party itself has moved in the last few years, it's moved quite radically towards the left, and it's bringing in a lot of supporters who would have traditionally voted Jeremy Corbyn or the left of Labour. A lot of those kind of people are joining. A lot of them are becoming active participants in the Green Party. People like myself, for various reasons, have joined the Green Party, and it's become the home of the left. So as much as I admire Jeremy and people like Andrew Feinstein, I have a lot of respect for them. But one thing that I am worried about is splitting the left vote. This is one thing that historically has always happened: is the left have been the destruction of their own fortunes, because they've always is too much. There's too much purity testing. There's too much trying to say that one person isn't as socialist enough or one person isn't as progressive enough. We broadly agree on so many things. We're representing ordinary people, we're representing people up and down the country, but we have an ecological focus as well. So yes, there's so much in that we have that is compatible. We could really work together and really make a powerful force for the left and for the progressive movement.
I imagine that Corbyn and Feinstein and co might say the same to you, that they are a left-wing movement, and why don't the Greens come to us? I mean, there are certain potential contradictions, aren't there? The Green movement is how should one put it? Isn't necessarily a natural ally of the industrial working class.
I'd question that. My dad was a steel worker, and I'm not trying to play the toolmaker son type of troll.
Yeah, an honourable thing to be.
Yeah, my dad was a genuine steel worker. He worked in the factories, in the forges in Sheffield. I'm born and bred Yorkshire working class background. Now, the way society is moving, we've become more ecologically aware. We've become more aware of our impact on the climate. So naturally, we moved away from a lot of those industrial, heavy polluting jobs. But there's, especially during Margaret Thatcher's time, towns close to Sheffield, places like Goldthorpe, these are towns where there's generations of worklessness and generations of poverty. If we created new green industry, energizing and rebuilding those people and put in opportunities where they actually needed, we could revitalize and bring people back from generations of worklessness into productivity, and we could create a whole boom around the green economy. So around that industrialization and contradiction with Greens, I don't think it really exists.
Well, isn't that, though, exactly what Ed Miliband's trying to do, and getting himself into a lot of trouble with the right, because he's pushing the green agenda and being accused of making it too expensive to keep big business, industrial type businesses in action?
I mean, there's work around. There's all sorts of work around building green manufacturing. We could really move into green manufacturing. There's lots of clean energy that we could move into. So there's stuff that we can do without impacting the existing organizations and the existing infrastructure. We can create new infrastructure. We can create new jobs, new opportunities, whilst bringing those old mills, things like coal. We've got some power stations that are still blast furnaces that are still working on coal and stuff like that. While we're greening those up, we can create new opportunities at the same time. So one shouldn't work in exclusivity to the other. I think we should work in tandem. I'm more of the approach of, look, there's lots of work to do. We shouldn't be pitting one against the other. We should be creating new and bringing old into line as well at the same time.
Can I ask? Let me bowl you a googly. You're green? Was Maggie Thatcher right to take on the miners and close the mines?
Yes, I am green. My dad actually went from his job. He was part of the Steelworkers Union. He went. I don't know if secondary striking or secondary picketing was banned at that time yet, but he went from the steelworkers. They went and joined the miners. So I'm with my dad. We'll stand up to Maggie all day long.
But she pursued your agenda brilliantly by getting rid of the coal mines.
No, the way that she did it was she created the the circumstances now, like I mentioned, Goldthorpe. Do you know, I worked in a takeaway there when I was about 14, 15. And I remember seeing people who had never worked since the pits had closed. Their children have never worked. So without replacing something, without providing opportunities, you can't just take a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. You have to build, you have to build a resilience before you take something away. You have to provide options, and you have to provide a replacement, because otherwise we're just, what Margaret Thatcher did with that was she just ruined towns across the country. And that, yeah, she just ruined towns across the country. She just ruined opportunities in the future for a lot of people.
Yes, the first story I ever wrote as a journalist was from the miners' strike. I spent a week with a mining family, and I understand what you're saying. The Let's move it on a little bit. It's quite interesting where you are. If you look at the Reform Party, which is making grounds, and then you look at the way Labour is responding to that by trying to copy them. And one of the key agendas of reform, probably the major agenda of reform, is anti-immigration, and in particular anti-Muslim, because they use that as a way of, you can see this, of generating hatred. How do you deal with reform, which is such a force, I presume, in your area?
So I'll give you a bit of background about the ward that I represent. So it's called Gipton and Hare Hills. It's almost like two wards within that have been combined together. Hare Hills has always been a home for immigrants. So it used to be the home for the Jewish immigrants, then it was the home for the Windrush generation, and then you've got the newer immigrants, so the Kurds, the Romanians, Eastern Europeans, newer African communities. So it's always been a home for people who are finding their feet in this country, getting themselves established, and then moving on. And Gipton is almost a large council estate. So there's been traditionally a lot of white working class people there. And one thing that we did during my campaign last year was we went out, we listened to everyone, we knocked on pretty much every door. We had so many conversations with people, and we offered people something different. We offered people hope. People aren't voting reform because they love reform. People are voting reform because they're fed up with the two-party system. They're fed up of the Conservatives and then Labour pretending to be left and then switching right when they're in government. They're fed up of politicians who don't sound genuine. What people want is to see people like them, people who represent them, stand up for the same values that they stand up for. This country, one of the things I love about this country is it's full of decent people, and is very tolerant, and what Reform are selling is a lie. They're selling the same sorts of scapegoats that has been done by the far right forever. It's the same talking point. We've got to find someone to blame, and they're the misery. They're the cause of all your miseries. They're the cause of all your problems. And at the moment, unfortunately, it is Muslims. It is immigrants. We're being blamed for the ills of society. But if you come into an area like Gipton and Hare Hills, you'll see the diversity, and you'll see how people get on, and you'll see how they're facing the same problems. We're facing problems of poverty. We're facing problems of poor housing, poor health, massive health inequalities. From the centre of my ward, along the main road, Round Here Road, if you take a 10-minute bus ride, the stat used to be, if you take a 10-minute bus ride, life expectancy changes by 10 years. Now that gap's even widened. That same 10-minute bus ride, life expectancy is 15 years. And I lived in those houses, black damp up and down the walls, poor rats running around the streets. It's poverty that's our problem, and it's lack of opportunity, it's lack of
Yeah,
decency.
but why is reform in that case being able to sell such a apparently convincing story to the people facing that sort of problem?
I mean, at the moment they're pumping out fairy tales, so they're pumping out, or there's, if you get rid of the immigrants, if you stop the boats, if you deal with the Muslims, then all your problems will be solved. They haven't got real policies. They announced this millionaire tax break or tax license. If you come into if millionaires want to stay in the UK, they pay a certain amount, and they've got a license to live here. I think they're trying to appeal to millionaires and trying to appeal to billionaires and work for them while selling ordinary people what do you call it, snake oil.
I How do you think of what is your analysis of the way the Labour Party is dealing with the reform problem? Because to listen to Keir Starmer and his analysts, above all Morgan McSweeney, I think, the way they have almost a copy reform. They see reform as their biggest enemy now, political enemy, and they are trying to copy the policies on immigration, the anti-Muslim rhetoric. It must be quite ugly for you, that.
It's really heartbreaking to see the Labour Party go down that route. I mean, one, because of my history with the Labour Party, and two, because of what the Labour Party should have been representing. It should have been representing ordinary people. It should be representing workers. It should be representing human rights. It should be standing up for good. Echoing reform's language, especially with Keir Starmer echoing Enoch Powell with his Island of Strangers speech. I'll give you a little anecdote about one of the things that happened after the riots last year in Hare Hills. So we had riots in Hare Hills, and after that, I organised this event called the City of Belonging, and we had 250 people attend. It was held in a local church. We had people from the Romani community. We had Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, white working class people. We had representatives of the Afro-Caribbean community. We had people from all kinds of backgrounds, people who wouldn't get together normally and have an open dialogue, have a frank discussion about what are we concerned about. And we went away from that meeting feeling like, a lot of us went away feeling like we'd got to know someone. We're living side by side as communities, but we're not getting to know each other within our communities. And that was a massive way of breaking down barriers in Hare Hills. And that's what we need to do. We need to be breaking down barriers, not putting up barriers. We need to be getting to know each other and learning about how we can help each other. Almost the way multiculturalism was supposed to work. Where communities, we might be different, we might have differences, but how do we live and work side by side and live together and live in harmony? And with Reform echoing their rhetoric and Labour moving to following that, we're breaking that tradition. We're breaking that British value of tolerance.
Yes, I find myself agreeing with you about that. Now, what is the answer to that? I mean, let's look at a specific question about Reform voters, who I don't, you probably understand better than me. I'm a little bit surprised that Nigel Farage has taken this extremist position on Gaza. Simply because I find it hard to believe that the average member of the British public supports what Israel is doing. And do you sense that the Reform voters are behind Farage on this? Or is there, rather as in the States, the MAGA voters are quite often them starting to be horrified by Israel?
I think we've got to separate some of the online chatter and some of the noise. and some of the people who are on so far right that we're never going to reach, you know. And then we've got to look at the ordinary people. No decent person, no ordinary person wants to see a child blown to bits. No one wants to see, bombs raining down on civilian populations, and death and destruction raining down. No decent person wants to see that. And you can have that conversation with people. The way sometimes that the right spin it is, people like me prioritize that over a local community. But if you come into my community, for example, Gibson and Hare Hills, you will see that people who are seeing me every single day, people have my personal mobile phone number. So I get phone calls first thing in the morning, last thing at night. I'm getting phone calls, from members of my community, and it doesn't matter whether they're Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Romani, English, whatever. People feel comfortable enough to contact me, and the reason for that is because I really I live the life that they're living, and as long as we have decent people representing us who can identify us, who can live the same, who have lived the same lives as us, and actually represent, really empathize with what we're going through, I think that's the way to beat reform. We create a commonality between the ruling class and the ordinary person. We have to have that. We have to build that bridge.
Since we arranged this interview, there's been quite a seismic political event in the United States. That is Zoran Mandani's victory in New York. Now, that's fascinating, and I would love to get your analysis of it, because what does it mean for you and for the people like you in Britain? Because here he is, Mandani, he represents a split in the left-wing establishment, a breakaway, so you somebody who can come out and be pro-Palestinian and win in New York and make that argument and be heard. Now, this is a huge moment of hope, presumably for you too. And what are the lessons you can learn from that?
I think we've got quite a different culture to the Americans, and especially in New York. We do have a little bit of a different culture to that. I mean, the Democrats have always been quite to the right of where traditional Labour Party would sit.
The right of where the traditional Labour Party, Tory Party would sit, by the way. Yeah.
So they've always been quite right compared to their politics is always quite right wing compared to ours. So it's fascinating to see a progressive and a young person, because he is very young.
33, I think. Yeah.
So someone who has that energy, who's able to inspire people and able to mobilize people. I do see a little bit of parallels with my campaign last year when I broke through.
Talk about that a little bit.
So I first stood for election in 2022, and it was just me handing out some leaflets by myself, and it was a 4-week campaign, and I was the first person in about 20 years to get past the 1,000 vote barrier in a Labour heartland seat in about 20 years. And the 2023, I closed the gap a little bit, so I got to close to 1,500 votes, but there was still like a 1,500 gap between Labour and me. And in 2024, I was up against a man who had been a councillor for 17 years, who had ruled this area. And I'm not going to say he was an elected. I'll say he ruled it, and he acted like he ruled it. He acted like some sort of king. And they almost felt like it was going to be an entitled, position. So whenever you have safe seats like that, you have complacency, and you have people who neglect the area, people who don't engage with the ordinary people, who don't get involved with communities, who don't represent people properly, and especially with their parties like Labour and Conservatives with their whipping system. So it doesn't matter what they individually represent; they're going to fall in line anyway once the whip comes down. My campaign started in 2024 with, again, on my own. A couple of people joined me, and when the Gaza war when the atrocities in Gaza started, and I've always been very vocal on Palestine. I've always stood up for Palestine rights, even when I was in a wheelchair, where I was going down to London on the demos. And people started recognizing the fact that, okay, this guy doesn't just care about our community, he doesn't just care about the potholes and the fly tipping and all of these kind of problems, but he's actually talking about issues internationally that we care about. And it motivated people. People started coming out. Before, I used to have to find lampposts to hang my banners on, and now I couldn't make banners fast enough to get people wanted to hang them on the doors. People who weren't even in my ward were hanging up my banners. So in one night we delivered almost 4,000 letters. Overnight. I was postal vote letters. I was thinking, how am I going to get these delivered? And a couple of people put a message out, look, Mothin needs help, and people just arrived. People came out from nowhere. We delivered these letters, and not only did we overturn a 1,500 deficit, we won by 700 votes. So we flipped it. We absolutely we flipped the vote, and then we won by a massive margin. It was something that was magical. It felt absolutely magical.
And so you can see yourself and your movement perhaps as Zoran Mandani in Yorkshire.
I mean, the Yorkshire Mandani, that's a new one. But I think that grassroots community organising, inspiring people, giving people hope, giving people something that they can get behind and something they can believe in. I think that's so important. And what we did in Gipton and Hare Hills, I think that's what we need to replicate up and down the country, going into areas and saying, okay, look, you've had this for so long. Here's someone who actually lives in your ward, who actually lives in your community, who actually cares about what you're going through, goes through the same things you're going through. Let's try something different. Let's give them a chance, and let's see what they can do.
Look, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, and I'm going to be following your career with enormous interest and now a certain amount of understanding, Mothin. So thank you very much for talking to Middle East Eye.
No, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.